Welcome to the second installment of Theory Chats, an interactive companion to the 2024 book, The Theory Story Reader for Social Studies, published with Teachers College Press. We hope this abbreviated conversation and the ones that are to follow will pique people's interest about how the book approaches stories and applies theory to social studies education. If it happens to do so, the volume is available at all major retailers or by going directly to tcpress.com and searching for the title. Brett and I are also more than happy to answer any questions related to the project, so please feel free to contact us. Today's guest is Dr. Wayne Journell, who will be talking about governmentality, which is highlighted in his chapter.
Thanks for joining us today, Wayne. Would you mind introducing yourself and then start by telling us a little bit about how you arrive or depart to and from theory in your research and teaching?
Sure. Thanks for having me. And my name is Wayne Journell. I'm a professor at the University of North Carolina at Greensboro. I'm actually the series editor for this book series that Brett and Aaron have published in, and I'm very excited about having their book in the series. My work is on teaching politics and social studies education generally, civic education generally. And, you know, I always think of theory when it comes to research in particular as the lens through which we look at these different phenomena we're studying. And of course, all of us come to research in, with different life experiences. And that's a major thing that's in this book that I think is really interesting. And I think that this theory, what speaks to me may not speak to someone else, but it allows us to look at phenomenon in different ways, which I think is important.
Definitely. Thank you so much. So your chapter's on governmentality. Why governmentality?
Well, I'm a big fan of Foucault, and again, thinking of my research on politics and and as it relates to power, and a lot of Foucault's work relates to power, and particularly the idea that true power is not, the Machiavellian, smashing things down and bending people to your will. True power is more subversive, and it's the everyday power. And the governmentality piece spoke to me, one, because of that aspect of it, but also obviously the connections to the political instruction that I research. But what really drew me to it is that, again, it's about that everyday power that we all participate in, oftentimes subconsciously, and the institutions that we participate in, that like schools, that everybody participates in some way, shape, or form, engages in that type of power manipulation, if you will. And again, a lot of times when we're in the midst of it, we don't see it. And so I think when we look at a phenomenon through a lens that really focuses on that power, it allows us to step back and really question what's going on.
That's great. Thank you so much for sharing those ideas about power and all of its forms and how it shapeshifts and how it continues to proliferate, especially in contexts related to education. So for our next question, our book is framed around Deleuze's suggestion of being on the lookout. What are some ways that theory reveals itself in your own life outside of the classroom or spaces where you conduct research?
Well, for again, governmentality, it's everywhere. I mean, anywhere you look, you're going to see it. In the chapter, I talk about, how I grew up in Roanoke, Virginia. And, Roanoke, Virginia is not a huge city by any means, but there was, like just in most cities, there is like Roanoke County, and then there's a Roanoke City. And, living in Roanoke County, we just assumed that's the way life was. We had good schools, there was, everybody had that, typical middle class, how lifestyle and things like that. But literally when you drove 10 minutes another way, you ran into Roanoke City, where they had, dilapidated schools, and there wasn't much, there wasn't a lot of income coming in. And at the time when I was younger, I didn't really, recognize it. But as I grew up, I realized there were definitely things in power at that time that were keeping the power structure the way it was. The people in Roanoke County might have sympathized with the folks in Roanoke City, but they weren't doing anything to, change the status quo because it benefited them. And, I think when, I see this now as I live in Winston-Salem, Greensboro, North Carolina, the same kind of things, right? So again, this power thing is everywhere. And I think it's an interesting way to look at some of the social problems that we see in social studies education that have been looked at through different lenses, through race and things like that, because I would argue that a governmentality perspective takes into account things like race and gender, inequality, but also brings in like class inequality, which I would argue often gets ignored a lot in social studies research. So I think it's a more comprehensive view of the way we can look at both society and things that are going on in social studies education.
Thank you. And you do a really nice job in your chapter articulating that and really connecting theory to your life experience. And so we really appreciate that from you and from all of the authors. And we did have one more question for you, Wayne, as editor of TRSE, as someone who reads a lot of theory and both in articles that are submitted and in your other work. So we want to ask, what advice do you have for scholars articulating theories and doing theoretical work? And as they sort of try to explain those theories to a broader social studies audience?
That's a great question. The biggest piece of advice I would have for scholars is that theoretical framework section that you have in every article you learn how to write in graduate school. Don't just leave that theory. When I get manuscripts for TRSE, they'll have a really pretty nice theoretical framework, but then they don't do anything with it. That theoretical framework we should be able to see that through the methods, and it should influence why you did the study, how you designed the study, and really most importantly, how you analyze that data. And then we should also see it through the findings, and then really see it in that discussion section. And that's what, to me, makes a really powerful article, when you have a strong theoretical framework, but you interweave it through the entire article. And a lot of scholars don't do that. They know they need theory, but they don't know how to weave it into and make it cohesive. And I think that's probably the biggest piece of advice that I could give.
I love it. Thank you so much. That's so helpful, because I know that that's really hard to explain. So I hope that your chapter in this book can really help young scholars and seasoned scholars do that work. So we want to thank you again for your wonderful contribution to the project and for being so generous with your time. We hope viewers and listeners today who wish to seek out the book in order to think more about power in all of its forms and dimensions will do so. And we also hope viewers and listeners will be on the lookout for Wayne's many books and articles. So thank you so much for being with us today, Wayne.
Thanks for having me. And buy the book.
Thanks. Yes, buy the book. Thanks.
Buy the book. And until we chat again, see you next time.